Okay. Well, we're going to get after. We got a pretty full schedule today, so welcome all. Thanks for jumping in and joining us for this week's or this month's Build with Nova. Sorry, we had a bit of a mix up. We were originally supposed to do this last week, or I think even potentially the week before, but some of our travel schedules didn't accommodate that. So we've pushed this. This is going to be our September and October Build with Nova. And so our next one, just so you know, is going to be the end of November. We'll be back onto that kind of last Tuesday of every month. So for those that are new to Build with Nova, the whole premise here is that this is open to our clients and those that want to learn more about exactly what we're building. Now, a big part of our culture here is that we're going to build what you tell us to build. So the entire premise here is to not only just show you what we're building and talk about these new features, but also give you the opportunity to provide input where we can ask you questions. You can tell us exactly what you want to see out of the platform. So questions and comments are greatly appreciated. Our team on the back end, we've got Amanda and Nick who are monitoring that comments channel on the chat. So throw it into there, and we look forward to kind of hearing what you guys think. So it's just me today. Rob is off on an adventure, a little bit of well-deserved time off for our CEO. So you're going to have to deal with me, but we do have a special guest appearance as well from Sean Ameche, who is a training captain, as well as the head of the UAS program for Ventura County Fire, who's going to be joining me at the tail end of today's call to talk a little bit about how they're using the Hotspot tool and some of his kind of operational procedures. I thought it'd be a lot better to hear from somebody who's using it in the real world than myself, and although, I consider myself a subject matter expert, it's really going to be great to have Sean come in and talk about his experience and what they've learned along the way using Nova. So, like I said, last Tuesday every month, this is about 45 minutes to 60 minutes. We have some time at the end for questions. Before we kind of fully jump in, I do want to introduce Jacob Mandel. So Jacob, we're going to turn your video screen on here. Jake is our brand new customer success manager. I'll let him fully introduce himself, but Jake has a vast experience in the drone space. He's also been a wildland firefighter and a structural firefighter. So he's actually coming over from our service business to help us on the customer success side. What does this mean for you all? As we've grown, we've realized that we really need to make sure that we maintain that support that we've had from day one with you as clients. It's one of the key things that we like to focus on here from a culture perspective is making sure that you are served. So it doesn't mean that, I'm no longer available or your account manager is no longer available for support. It's that you also have Jake as somebody here to help with any sort of troubleshooting and technical support. Jake, do you want to introduce yourself really quick here?
Absolutely. Hey, everybody. Like Dan said, yes, I am the new customer success manager. Within the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be reaching out to everybody just as a little formal introduction. And yeah, background, wildland firefighting, structural firefighting, flying multiple drones all over Canada on wildfire. Now moving into Nova. And yeah, just always available to help 24/7. Whatever you guys need, I will be here. So feel free to reach out.
We're going to Jake's phone. Thanks, Jake. Jake's email and phone number up on the screen there. We'll throw that into the chat at the end here. But like Jake said, he's going to be reaching out to the vast majority of you guys moving forward. And so feel free. Don't be a stranger. He's here as a support tool for you and you alone. Awesome. Thanks, Jake. Appreciate you, buddy. We'll chat soon. Okay. So let's jump into what we're going over today. So the big one, we've had a ton of improvements in bugs. We finished our bug sprint. I think we're still kind of working through some of the tail end of it, but I want to talk a little bit about that. Some minor improvements to the app, some new features that aren't as easily aware or available as you might consider. So I'll kind of highlight that. And then we're going to do a deep dive into our Hotspot panel V2. For those that have been flying fires, you will have noticed that the Hotspot modal is vastly different. And so I kind of want to jump into it, talk a little bit about it. And then I'm going to spend some time focusing on hotspot analysis. So I'm going to talk technical. I'm going to basically walk through that imagram, through that graph, and walk through exactly how you guys should be interpreting heat. I think kind of coming here to the end of the big fire season. We're now into October, still some fires lingering, but good kind of review on some of the data sets that we've seen come through. And then I'm actually going to turn it over to Sean, and I'm going to ask him a bunch of questions, and he's going to show off some of the work that they're doing in Ventura County and exactly how they're using the Hotspot tool, because he's pretty advanced in terms of filtering and adjusting kind of different parameters within the tool. And so we'll bring him in to focus on that. Okay. So many improvements, bugs squashed, what is a bug, guys? It's these little things that annoy us. I think 2 months ago or 2.5 months ago, we put out to most of you and said, hey, like, please tell us exactly what little things in the app are bugging you. And we got a great response from a bunch of you. So I just wanted to thank you all for your effort on that. It's not just us. It takes our client and you all to kind of help us build a better product. So I think we're at over 60 new bugs have been squashed, and they're still working on some. I'm not going to cover every single one of them, but hopefully as you kind of start to work with the app, these little things that might have been frustrating you, or at least frustrating me, leading up till now, have officially been squashed. So appreciate you and all your support, and shout out to the dev team, the entire team, the entire development team, spent the last few weeks kind of working on this. So we put all new features aside and focus solely on bugs. So shout out to them for doing that, and thank you to all who did provide feedback. Okay. So what do we built in September? So we had some notable improvements, and I'm going to actually jump into the app and walk through this as well. So one is we've added in a what three words. So right click for what three words. We've made some improvements for search for location. The other thing we've added is non-Chrome, or if you're logging in via mobile, you're now going to get a notification that says, hey, this is not the best place or the most optimal location to be accessing Nova. So for those that don't know, and actually I see Tyson Gu on the call. I was just down in Hawaii with Tyson a few weeks ago. He was running Nova off Safari, and just little things weren't working. Some of the PDF map exports. If you're running Nova, make sure that you're running it off of a tablet or a computer, and you're using Chrome. So we're now highlighting that for users, so that way these little things that are somewhat out of our control in Safari or Edge or Opera or whatever browser you may be using, you're going to now be notified, hey, maybe switch over. Another thing is this process after uploading setting. So I'll talk about that when I jump into the platform, but it's a key setting that's now being saved if you're toggling it on and off. For those people that are adding huge data sets to the platform. I see Sam Outhouse here from New Brunswick. So Sam, this one's for you, buddy. I'll be sure to cover it. Then the other thing is scan area. This is now going to be a polygon that you can showcase from a hotspot perspective. So let's jump into the app and I'll kind of walk through a few of these new features. So I'm going to head over here and I'm going to, everybody can see this. Great. Correct, Amanda? Okay. So the first thing we're going to be covering is what three words. So for those people that are using what three words, or as a coordinate reference system, when you right click on the map now, you can actually see that I not only get my lat long coordinate, but I also get this what three words coordinate. So sweated folded rulers, you can copy paste that, send it to somebody. We are going to be adding it as well to the hotspot export. We've had, I think actually some guys out of Los Angeles said that they were using what three words for some of their hotspot location. But kind of a small little, feature, but something that I wanted to highlight because it's been a request from quite a few different agencies. The other thing we've optimized or improved is our search for location. So if I throw in our address here, 560 Johnson Street, you're now going to get a pin on the map, and it's also going to zoom you in a little bit further. For those that have used the search tool before, it was somewhat zoomed out before, didn't really help, and we also didn't know the exact address. So as you zoom in on sat data, you can always right click and then place a coordinate or place a new point based on that search location. Right. Talked about non-Chrome. Okay, let's talk about this process after uploading. So I'm actually going to walk through this flow so everybody can see. But when I upload a data set, so let me let's grab a small data set here. 1 second. Okay, so when I grab a set of photos, one thing that you can do is you can actually toggle off this process after uploading and upload this data set without it automatically going to processing. Why would I want to do this? You'd want to do this if you were scanning or doing a map of a really large area that maybe you were collecting data over multiple drone flights. So you're in the field, and let's say you're probably going to be out there for a few hours collecting data over this site. But while you're in the field, you also want to be uploading this data and getting ahead of it. You don't want to wait till the end and upload 4,000 photos at once. You kind of want to batch upload to take advantage of the time while you're out there. So what you can do is you can upload that data set. So you can see that I toggled off. So now these photos are just uploaded. They're ready to process. Now, if I were to refresh my page here, because I've uploaded those photos, they're still going to be available. You can see, I jump back in, Great. I have those photos still uploaded. Now, if I were to add more files, let me just grab, another set of photos here to showcase this. When I drop them in, what happened in the past was that this used to revert back to being turned on. So clients would upload 2 data sets, they'd press upload, and then it automatically process. And they'd have to restart the upload process in the past. So this is a setting that is saved. It's going to help you guys. For anybody that's experienced this, it is really annoying because let's say you're going to upload 1,000 photos and then you upload another 1,000, and then it's going to automatically process. It's not most ideal if you're hoping to batch upload and then process at the very end. So that's what that kind of new little feature was. It was a request from a few different clients. So kind of excited to get that in. Small, but mighty. Okay. And the last thing I want to show before we jump over to some error handling is the scan area. So what is the scan area? So I'm going to turn on this infrared ortho, but let's say I didn't have the ortho turned on and I wanted to make a map that showed that I scanned this entire fire, right? So we have a number of hotspots across this, let's say, but I want to actually show that, what is the total area that I did in fact scan? Under the flight tab, you're going to see that we have the scan area option. So what this does is it takes the boundary of the orthomosaic that we generated, and you can actually adjust the outline and fill of it as well and add it as a layer in your map. So if I go to create a mapping product, okay, I'm going to create a map of this fire. From my features tab, I can not only showcase the perimeter area, but I can also showcase the total area of the scan. So I'll just zoom in here to kind of showcase that. So, we get a lot of requests for this, especially on these kind of fires during the mop-up stage where you might only find a few hotspots. You want to be able to show, hey, what was the total area that we actually ended up scanning? So this is now a feature. It's basically acting as a polygon within the app. And so, something that you guys can add to your mapping products to bolster it and show off exactly what work has been done. Okay, I'm going to jump back over here. So those are kind of some of the notable improvements. The other thing we added was some error handling. So what does this mean? I'm sure you've all seen it. If you've used the app, you've had a data set that just says process failed. And I'm going to, Sam, I'll come to your question as soon as I finish this up here. So we've added in some new error handling. So based on the most common errors that we see, we get a log of, hey, what happened? So one, if your ortho couldn't be built and it's likely due to limited overlap, you're likely going to get this error. So it's going to pop up in your layers panel. It's something that you can toggle off and turn off once it pops up, but it'll basically say, hey, we failed to do this. Make sure that you're looking top down and that you have a greater overlap. Most of the time, the stitching fails because you're lacking overlap between your photos. Second, for those that have experienced this, processing failed due to a complex data set. Try lowering the quantity of files and process it again. This is a big boy ortho. This means that you might have put 6, 7, 8,000 photos to the platform, but it might have been too much for the system to handle and it timed out. So when you see this, reduce the number of photos, split it up into 2 different flights, and try again. And then finally, we see this one a lot, especially with the Hotspot tool, where you get this projection issue. What happens is because we're using the infrared orthomosaic to place the individual hotspot locations into the real world, if the ortho fails to process, likely because of overlap, and we can't place more than 50% of the hotspots that have been identified, then we're going to fail the job. Because what we don't want to do is provide you a product where the hotspot data is inaccurate, right? Where you have hotspot data that's 40, 50, 60, 100 feet off because we couldn't accurately place it onto the orthomosaic. So a lot of times when you see this hotspot projection fail, this is likely due to poor overlap in the orthomosaic. So you're going to see these errors pop up. Of course, always feel free to contact us, contact Jacob, call a helpline. We're here to support, but we're trying to provide you more information on the front end to help you kind of handle and troubleshoot in the field rather than it just being this black box. Okay, I saw there's a few questions here. Sam, is this change active now with showcasing the areas? For the scan area, I assume you're talking about? Yes. Yes, it is. So you'll be able to showcase the total area just underneath. If I go back to that example here, if I go back to this fire, you can access that scan area by clicking your layer, like the hotspots flight, and under the flight tab. Okay. Scan area is now active. If it's not there, it might be that it's only going to be active for, data sets that have been processed since we added it. I'll double check though, but I have a feeling that might be the case. Okay, great question. Okay, jumping back here, we have a new hotspot modal. For those that have jumped in, it's a big improvement. We used to have, it's probably one of the most, like, the oldest features was that pop-up window from the bottom, which you couldn't interact with the map. It was kind of clunky. So now we've got a new modal. We've got improved layout. We've got the ability to see your images as well as your hotspot lists. You can zoom into the images within the screen without having to zoom in on the browser. And you can also remove multiple hotspots. Now, we've showed some of the designs for this in the past, and so I'll show it active and live right now. But I just want to answer Sam's final question here. Perfect, makes sense. They're an ideal number of photos or size for an ortho to process before it fails. Good question, Sam. That completely depends on the size of the photos you're uploading. So say I'm, knowing the kind of data sets that you've uploaded to the past, or in the past, sorry. If you're using like a high resolution sensor, something like a P1, those photos can be 10, 12 megabytes in size versus if I'm using an H20T or an M30T and I'm using the wide angle lens, those photos can be 4 or 5 megabytes. And so really it has to do with the amount of data coming in. I always say, like, max out 50 gigs. 50 gigs is a good number. We're going to be able to handle it. When you get up into the 100, 200, 300, that's where we start to see some issues where the system will time out. It's just too much data coming through. But I've seen anywhere from 6,000 to 10,000 photos be processed in a single job. That doesn't necessarily mean that if you upload 10,000 photos today, that job's going to be successful, though. Okay. There's a number of factors there that play into it on the back end. Good question. Okay. Hotspot modal. Let's jump in. I'm going to use this project again to kind of walk through some of this stuff. So the new hotspot modal. So when I select a hotspot, I'm now going to get this little mini window that I can quickly infer and also see the imagram, which is really nice. And then when I go in to see full details, it brings up this side-by-side view. So a couple things. First, I can expand this side-by-side view. So I can go full screen or I can go down to quarter screen. Sorry, half screen or quarter screen. You're also going to see that I have full capability on the map side of things to interact with the map. You can see that I have my field of view. So this is toggled on at the top. So that's showing me my camera's field of view. And then here's your north arrow. Okay. So this is signifying the direction of the image. And it's pretty easy because I know that this is the hotspot. This is the hotspot. I get my orientation. But I can also turn on this image overlay, which is super nice as well. Okay, so I have a couple ways to kind of see the photo on the map view. From the actual new modal on the left-hand side, we have all the same information. So you have your sensitivity, you have your hotspot, the coordinate. Okay, you also get file name and some other metadata here. And then if I click this show list, what it's going to show me is every single photo. So as I scroll through these images, you're going to see that it's following along photo by photo from this side, okay? Now, if I just wanted to filter through and analyze images that had hotspots, once I'm into my show list, I'm going to use this filter button to show photos with hotspots. So if I select this photo, great, it's now showing me, hey, hotspot 137 was identified in this photo. Now you can also see here's a great example. As I kind of jump through these photos, these little white boxes show up. So these white boxes symbolize that this photo did in fact find other hotspots. So, going back to how we analyze heat, right? You might see the hotspot in 10 different photos. You might just see it in one. But at the end of the day, we're going to select one of those photos to show you on the map in Innova. So what this is saying is that in, photo 258, there's 2 other hotspots that were identified. Okay. So as I kind of roll through, and there you go again, 139 was identified in this. So this area, this clump of hotspots that we're seeing here, it's picking up on all the heat, but it's going to be picking it up across multiple photos. So I just want to kind of highlight that and what those white boxes mean versus red boxes. So if you have a hotspot turned on, like this example, hotspot 128, what it's saying is that 128 was identified in this photo, but there's also another hotspot that this photo was used for the hotspot analysis. Hotspot size is obviously also available. So that's a key differentiator and something new. It's a lot easier to kind of rip through these photos and analyze heat now as you go through. The other thing we've added is this remove hotspots button and place hotspots in the top right. So if you're running along and you see that there is a hotspot, let's say that I wanted to actually add a hotspot to this side of this, burning area. What I can do is I can place a hotspot down really quickly, place another one. But I can also just as easily remove hotspots. So prior to this, you would have to remove hotspots individually. So take a hotspot, press delete, new hotspot, delete. We've added in this free draw tool. It's really similar to our draw tool in our fire perimeter. So if I wanted to take those manual hotspots that I just added and actually delete them, I'm just going to draw a circle around them, draw a box, and then I'm going to press remove two hotspots. Great. Remove hotspots. So really easy to QA QC, especially when you guys are, we'll talk with Sean in a little bit about how he's analyzing heat. But if you notice that there's some false positives, maybe it's the fire engines or people, it's really easy to just circle those hotspots and delete them really efficiently. The other thing is that if you wanted to go and see any hotspots that were removed from a QA QC perspective, you can do that with this filter in the top left. Really excited about this. This is, a lot closer to something that, we've been using internally for the last few years, which is, the infrared analytics software that we built to get to this point. And so, it's one step closer in our minds, a lot more effective, a little bit more technical. And I think this is a good segue for me to jump in and talk a little bit about how you analyze heat and how you analyze a simogram. I will pause just for a moment to see if there's any questions on the new modal while I kind of get myself sorted here. Okay. So analyzing heat. I've got a few different data sets to show. So as I was kind of scrolling through these hotspots, a lot of you probably noticed this blue graph. So what is this? This is called the imagram. You can think of this as the infrared intensity or the radiometric intensity of every column of pixels or row of pixels across your image. So when I see a spike here and a spike here, you can see that this little T bar that we've kind of added to this viewport matches up exactly with that. Okay. So this is showing, hey, this hotspot right here is indicative of this spike in this graph. This is a really good example of what a true positive looks like. So, how do we analyze this graph? A true positive should be typically a thin, tall spike where relative to the surrounding pixels, it is clearly differentiated. This is a very obvious, very, very, very obvious data set. This was collected probably at 1,200 feet AGL in the middle of the night on a fire with fairly dispersed heat, not a lot of solar loading. Okay. Very obvious kind of data set. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to a different data set. So let's look at this data set, which is from a prescribed burn not too long ago, I think last year sometime maybe. I'm going to just turn down the sensitivity here a little bit and show a few other hotspots. So as I click on these hotspots, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to analyze. So here's a great example of some false positives. And I think one thing I always like to stress too is, okay, let's talk a little bit about when you analyze thermal data, how do you understand the conditions that you were operating in? So, before I even analyze this image, let's talk a little bit about this data set. So one, I'm in a grassy hillside. We can see the contour change. I'm west facing aspect. And this data set we knew at the time was collected at 10 p.m. in the middle of summer. So this hillside had been getting solar loading for probably 8 to 10 hours prior to us scanning. We had a brush fire or a grass fire RX run through, and then we went and scanned it. Okay. So I'm anticipating there's lots of like hot rocks and brush and little roots and things like that on the side of this hill. I'm expecting there to be some false positives just based on the fact that I'm scanning directly after solar loading. And so I have to be a little bit careful when I'm interpreting this data. Okay. So I think it's always very important to understand the conditions that you're operating in when you're analyzing infrared data. So I bring it into Nova. Now I'm on high alert. This isn't like middle of the night mop up stage where I'm expecting to see very little heat. So let's say I pick up on these hotspots. Okay. One thing I'm noticing is that, there is some hotspots, but if I kind of zoom in on this data set, man, like there seems to be a lot of hot spots across this fire. Now, knowing kind of the conditions that this went through, right? I'm scanning this RX maybe a day later, and I'm not anticipating there to be that much heat. And then I look at what my immogram shows me. So in this example, I've got lots of spikes across my scene. But what we can see is that, this spike relative to the ground or relative to everything else is not all that different, right? It's not that indicative. When we think back to that true positive we were just looking at, it's not isolated. When I infer this data set, I'm thinking to myself, okay, if I'm going to call this a hotspot and this a hotspot, then man, I basically have to call all of these a hotspot, right? Which would require me to reduce my sensitivity all the way down to increase, the number of hotspots that are being placed across my scene. And I'm likely thinking to myself, hey, these are false positives. As I kind of run through this data set, I can quickly double check. Oh, I'm going to show my lists. I'm going to turn on my hotspots. So I'm just looking at the ones with heat. Okay, I jump into, a scene that looks like this. Now, here's a really good example of, is this true heat? Is this a false positive? So one, where am I? I'm kind of up here. This is actually this hotspot here, hotspot 1. It looks to me like as I zoom in, there might be a couple heat signatures across this incident, right? Tiny spikes relative to the surrounding area. So I'm going to keep this one in the back of my mind. I might call this a hotspot. Okay, but then I come over here and I see something that looks like this, right? Here's the same area. We can actually see some of the rock features and loading that we would have seen from the previous hotspots that we were looking at. And I can tell like this is very obvious about what a true positive looks like. So it is really nice. Like if you guys can find a hotspot within your data set as a proxy and then use that to kind of help set the standard for your analysis moving forward, I think it's really valuable. So this is a hotspot. I can now pretty confidently say like these are not hotspots. So I'm actually going to remove these. I'm going to circle, remove those 4 hotspots. So now the question becomes, hey, what about these? This is a tough one. If I was in the field, I would probably, just based on the profile of this, potentially send somebody out. The only reason I wouldn't have would be based on the shape. That based on the size of these hotspots, in terms of the amount of pixels they're covering, I would have expected a larger radiometric intensity. Having field truth this data set, this is 3 mule deer up on the side of the hill. So, when you're scanning, they were only a couple hundred feet above ground here. You can pick up on deer and animals like this. So, but we can kind of see the difference between this sort of heat signature and then this on the same data set, same conditions, same height above ground. So these are just some ways that you can kind of interpret this data and ways to better understand exactly what we're looking at. I'm going to jump over here to actually one of Sean's fires who we're talking with, because this is a really good example of showcasing hotspots that were taken in the middle of the day and still being identified with those spikes. And so, understanding, hey, what are the conditions we're operating in? I think Sean flew this at 800 feet, 8 to 900 feet. Looks like it was at, let me see here, 0110, 1528. So 3:30 in the afternoon on January 10th, this data set was scanned. And we can actually see, even just with the isotherms, tons of infrared solar loading on these hills. This specific hotspot, we're picking up on this spike on my y-axis and then this spike on my x. Here's a good example where, hey, that spike isn't soaring. It's not through the roof. Actually, if you were to take, a line across the top of this graph, it's not that much hotter than my solar loaded, hillside over here. However, that profile, that very skinny line, especially on that y-axis, really indicates to me like, hey, there's a hotspot here. And if I look over, across this data set, there's probably a hotspot right here somewhere. Same thing, and another one right over here. Okay. So This is how you can kind of infer data sets during the day. You're going to be anticipating that differential to be a little bit different than what I was just showing you at night, right? The last project I'm going to showcase here was actually a fire done by Joel Byam up in Yakima County in Washington State just this past weekend. And I thought it was a great example. Daytime scan, small fire. What are some things that we're looking for immediately as I'm analyzing this data set? Well, one, I'm expecting there to be lots of heat. They just knocked this thing down. So first thing I'm saying is, hey, like, what are these hotspots doing out here? That, if I have my visible ortho on in the background, it looks like it should be in the middle of the break. Well, you know what? When I go and interpret this data set, it's very obvious. Hey, these hotspots are actually one of their trucks. Okay, sweet. So it's a really easy place for me to just go remove those hotspots. Sweet, remove hotspots. And then I also noticed one hotspot way down here. I mean, this is one of those hotspots where you're like, something is super warm there. It's super fat, super wide. I'm not even really sure, but sure as heck that we're going to go and check this out. Because if we were to draw a measurement from the, what we thought was the edge of this fire, this is about 200 feet outside the line. So these are just some kind of tips and tricks on how I look at data and how I want to analyze fire. I think this is a great segue. I'm actually going to turn it over to Sean Ameche and stop sharing here and let him talk a little bit about how they are analyzing heat and using the platform for hotspot analysis. Please feel free to jump in, ask questions, everybody. But Sean, I'm going to turn it over to you, sir. I'm just going to figure out this. Go.
All right. Can you
Welcome,
hear me?
Sean. Thank you, sir. We can hear you. How are you?
Good. All right. Let's see if I can share my screen here. Host disabled attendee screen sharing.
We're on it here. One sec. So for those that don't know Sean, I'll let you introduce yourself. Training captain, Ventura County Fire, also head of the UAS program. Sean has scanned a ton of fires, as well as uses the platform a little bit for commercial fires, as well as some pre-plans as well. And so really excited to have you here today, Sean. I know that your skill set here is super valuable. So thanks for jumping on. I think I'll kickstart it off and I'll just ask you a question, maybe like 10,000 foot. Give me the high level of how you are approaching scanning fires. And that's everything from, 1 acre to when you're up at that like 5,000 acre, huge fire. How are you approaching these scans? What are some of your kind of basic principles and procedures and policies? And as you kind of train other people to do this, what are you telling them they should be focusing on? And then we'll kind of get into the weeds in a single project.
Okay. Yeah. Are you able to see my screen now?
We got you. Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
It just went away.
Cool.
1 sec.
It just went away. Let me see. And share it there.
Perfect. Yeah, we're good
All right.
now.
Cool. Yeah, so when we start off, so we've been flying a lot of fires and using Nova all the time, like Dan said, from everything. So we're on 34 stations out of here, cover a pretty big county in Southern California. Brush fires, vegetation fires, from everything from 1 acre to hundreds of thousand acres are a pretty common thing around here. The UAS has been game changers for us for operations and mapping and different things like that. And I'll talk about kind of the process that we go to when I get responded out to a fire. Some of the main things when I'm going out to getting responded to a fire is going to be what kind of mission are we going for? So is it going to be a small fire? Is it going to be a large fire? All these things are going to affect what kind of mission I'm going to be doing, whether I'm just flying the perimeter or whether we're doing 100% coverage on the fire. And obviously the size affects that as well. It's a lot of coordination with incident commanders and the operations and just finding out what they're looking for as far as if we're going to be doing 100% mop up, if we're doing 100 feet in from the perimeter, 100 feet. And a lot of that's driven by fire conditions, fire behavior, current and expected, and also the weather forecast over the next few weeks as well. So I'll coordinate with the IC and figure out what they're looking for. And then also depends on when we're flying the fire. Oftentimes I'll respond out and we'll get there and the copters are still dropping water on the fire. So we'll be staged and ready to go, get all our notifications made, get all our flight approvals ahead of time. And then as soon as they get that forward progress stops and the copters are able to kind of clear the incident, we'll do a mapping mission right away working on. One of the first objectives that we're going to get is getting that perimeter of the fire. So we'll use Nova for that. We'll do scan the fire, do a quick flight around the perimeter of the fire, especially for these smaller fires. Anything less than like 100 or less than 50 acres, something like that. We'll do a quick scan around, get a general idea how big that fire is, and then just build a mapping mission within the UAS platform that we're using. Do automated mapping mission, try and get that real-time terrain follow. If we can keep the drone a consistent distance above the ground, it'll give us a more consistent data set as far as those temperature ranges that we're dealing when we're dealing with the filters through Nova after the fact. So getting either downloading the DSM file or using the drone that has those active real-time terrain follows makes that data a lot more consistent, a lot more across the filters and everything like that. So all my pilots will be doing that. Kind of some of the next thing is we fly, so flown in TFRs, out of TFRs. When we're in a TFR, I can fly very high. Flew like a month ago, maybe 2 months ago now. We flew a fire. I was up above about 2,000 feet above ground level, mapping about 5,000 acre fire for that, doing the perimeter with some of the our neighboring agencies. And that one, obviously, you can process it faster, taking less pictures and everything like that. But even at 2,000 feet, we got feedback from the boots on the ground the next day that every single hotspot we sent them through the map was confirmed heat on that fire and needed to be addressed, flying the perimeter of that 5,000 acre fire from 2,000 feet AGL. So the Nova works really good, even flying at higher altitudes. I typically fly as high as I can. Most of the time, we're going to be maxed out at that 400 feet AGL for most of the fires that we're going to be flying, unless it's a larger fire and we have that TFR established, or unless I want to apply for some SGI waivers or different things like that. But typically 400 feet is what I'll be flying at, and the Nova's software processes that just fine. Really accurate data from there. So the next thing that we'll be do is kind of depends on what kind of time of day I'll be flying it at. Like Dan was showing that fire, I was able to fly that one as soon as I could fly. It was at 3:30 in the afternoon, which is going to be the peak time for that solar loading that he was talking about. So for that one, it was more of a grass fire, and not a lot of rocks and different things like that. There were some heavier fuels that were holding heat for longer times during that one, but some other areas, if there's a lot of rocks, if I'm flying a really rocky area, those rocks are really gonna hold that heat from that solar loading and produce. And I'm gonna have to really kind of adjust the filters and use the filters after the fact to kind of go through there. But I'll kind of dive into my process here. Let's find the Maria fire. I think this is around 50 acre fire, something like that. But
Sean,
and
just
stop me if
one
you want,
question
Dan.
for you, Sean. While
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt. Just one question for you while you bring this up and kind of talk about the Maria fire, 'cause it's a great example. But if like, let's say you were to take up a new job tomorrow, give up, hang up the uniform, like, would you like if you were to give one spec to a new guy, what would you say? Like, if you're flying at 400 feet, what's the one thing you would tell them to make sure that they do if they're going to be scanning fires?
The one spec, I would say if they're going to be scanning new fires, I think keeping that altitude, the AGL consistent
So using
is
terrain follow.
yeah, using that terrain follow.
Yeah.
Or the DSM file, yeah. However you're going to do that, get that done.
Yeah.
Keeping that consistent makes it consistent across the fire. This fire is pretty flat on this one, but a lot of our fires are have pretty steep terrain. And when you're looking, if you look at the temperature gauge on the drone, I saw a hotspot from about 800 feet when I was flying. It showed it around 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and then wanted to see what the true temp was, so I got down to about 200 feet above that hotspot, and just from dropping from 800 to 200, that hotspot went from 80 degrees up to 300 degrees.
Right.
So there's a big difference depending on how high or how far away you are from that
Right.
hotspot. So keeping that consistent across the board makes it consistent when you're processing the data.
Checks out. Okay, let's get into this one here.
All right, so this is the Maria Fire. We had multiple copters dropping water on this one. We stopped it. We'll look at our perimeter around here. So just under 60-acre fire here. And we went ahead and flew it right after the fact. And you see, they just started mop-up operations on this fire. So you'll see that there's hotspots all over, right? So I don't want to give this product to the incident commander and say, um, so I don't want to give them this product where we're looking at this and they're basically just get dots all over the fire, right? Because that's a little overwhelming if I'm giving them, 200, 300 hotspots on a 60-acre fire. They're like, well, the whole thing's hot then, right? So what I do on something like this is sometimes I'll use the filters and I'll bring the filters up. So I'll just get some of the hotter hotspots or some of the bigger ones and different stuff like that. And then I sometimes, depending, I'll even use the heat index just to show them some of the hotter areas of the fire. And so I kind of mess around with these filters. And a big part of this goes along with communication with the incident commander. Like, hey, I'm going to give you a map. This isn't showing every hotspot for the fire, but this just kind of shows you where the majority and the hottest parts of the fire are now, so we can start those mop-up operations in the most efficient areas. And then when we get later on, I'll show you some of the follow-up flights for the next operational periods. How I'm going more from like a heat, like a hot area type of a map, more to a hot spot detection, a search and destroy type of mission at that point.
Sean, how do you you mess with those filters up above? Like, is that pretty standardized? How do you assess like where you're gonna, that's cool to hot, right? And just so everybody knows, like our temperature filter says cool to hot for the exact reason Sean mentioned. When he was at 800 feet, the hotspot was 80 degrees, and when he was at 200, it's 200 or 300. And so, like, are you just looking at the map and kind of assessing, hey, like, I know what my IC wants, or I know what my wildland chief wants to see. Like, he wants to see where the biggest areas of heat are holding. And so you're kind of taking it from this overwhelming dots down to something that is like, what are the big priorities? Like, how are you determining where to leave that filter?
Yeah, so if you look at the map here, I look at like how I want to display it, and then I adjust that filter. So when I go back here, and there's just heat, if I go all the way down with both of these filters, you see there's heat everywhere on that fire, right? This map isn't really beneficial at that point, right? So then I'll bring it up, just kind of, and I'm looking at the map and seeing how much heat. I want to get rid of most of it because I'm just trying to find those hottest areas, the bigger hot spots, right? So as I'm bringing it up, typically somewhere over like 10 square feet here on the hotspot size, and then bring it, and then I just keep bringing the temperature up until I've basically filtered out most of those kind of. And so I'm just looking, basically trying to get like a reasonable percentage of those away at this point, because I'm not trying to do 100% coverage right here. This isn't that final product of we're going to call the fire out. This is just where they're going to begin their mop up operations.
I'll never forget doing a live demo in Mesa, Arizona, and the wildland chief with Mesa Fire. I like turned on a fire and there was like 3,000 hotspots, and he just interrupts me. He's like, I don't care. It's like, I don't care. But I was like, just hold on, just wait a second. We'll filter this down. Sean, you had a question from Sam Outhouse. He's with the GNB, so New Brunswick. What type of stage fires are you flying during the day generally for detection or cleanup?
What kind of, can you repeat that real quick?
What type of stage fires are you flying during the day generally for detection? Are you doing that for detection or cleanup? So I think basically saying, what fire is this? They just knocked this down, right?
Yeah, so this was I think around noon. They just got knocked down. Forward progress was just stopped on this fire. They just the copters just cleared this incident. And so this is that initial fire. Basically, there's still probably active fire on some parts, but they're handling it with hand crews and hand lines on the ground at this point.
Would you fly this same, like if you were in the mop-up stage, would you also fly this at noon? Or I think that's kind of what Sam's question might be, is like, are you adjusting the time of day you're flying fires based on the stage of the fire?
So ideally, the best times to fly are either at night or early morning before any of that solar loading occurs. But sometimes that's not an option. Sometimes it all depends. And if it's a smaller fire, if we're down like at like 10 acres or something like that, and we'll probably finish it within that next operational period, I'll have to do the mop-up flight at whenever we can, whenever they're I'll do it in the afternoons too. It's still fine processing that. It just might take a little bit more finagling on the filters over here, and follow-up flights,
And,
verifying some of the hotspots as well.
and I guess like
But
your premise there, right, Sean, is like, hey, a map is better than no map. And so like I know that
yeah,
I'm gonna, even if I fly during the middle of the day during mop up, maybe there's a chance I'll miss something super, super small that's gonna get caught up in some false positives. But I'm providing them the big heat, the things that they should be focusing on at that time, right?
yeah, the benefit of flying it right as soon as they're done dropping water, they're just starting these mop-up operations. I can get this orthomosaic, which I can get if I fly it at night, right? So I can get this very clean orthomosaic map. I get especially if I pull all the filters down, right, and run the hotspots. If we run it at a point, it makes it really easy for me to come through and draw this perimeter around the fire.
Right.
And that's one of the first things that incident commanders, PIOs, information officers, all those, they want the perimeter of that fire, and they want the acreage, right? So
Yeah.
I'll do this. I'll bring the filters all the way down. I can even bring the sensitivity down, and I'll draw that perimeter. And that's the first thing I do. So like
Right.
even that's what they care about more than the heat map at first, is getting this product. And then once we get that, then I can kind of start to tailor it down to where we want to go from there. But yeah, if we're just doing mop-up operations, I'll fly it at any time during the day. Often I'll do for a fire like this, I flew this every morning and then every afternoon, right? So I'd fly in the morning, give them a plan, see where the heat is, and they'd send, rather than having like two whole strike teams attached to this or different things like that, a bunch of people were able to get this, I think, with like 3 fire engines and a hand crew, because of the information that we're providing them through these maps and these heat maps of the drones for the following operational periods. So I'm able to give them these maps, fly in the morning, show it to them at the morning briefing. They have their objectives. They go out through there, and these are like the following operational periods where I'm talking about when we're getting into like more like this kind of a map here, right? So this was the first day. This was the next morning we went and flew it, and this is now more where the heat is at this point, right? So
Yeah.
I'll give this map to them, and then in the afternoon I'll go fly it again. Um, and I think the afternoon flight was this one, right? So um, it all depends on the size of the fire, how many resources are assigned to it, and kind of the objectives at that point. But
Right.
I'll often, for the fires 50 acres or less, fly them a couple every morning and every afternoon. That way, if they're going into that night operational period, they have an idea like, hey, there's one hotspot that's kind of near the perimeter over here. We have some ash pits that are going to be located in here that need to be addressed, but they're probably not going to cause a problem if we're not expecting any fire weather or winds throughout the night.
Yeah.
And we'll be able to handle those in the morning. But there's a couple, this little guy over here, these ones, and this guy are something that they'll probably have to keep an eye on throughout the night. Different
What's
stuff like that.
I noticed that you're not using distance to perimeter with this specific fire. Are you using that filtering option much? Or are there other fires where that comes into play?
Yeah, I use it all the time actually. So this one, really dirty burn. You can see on the orthomosaic, a lot of green in there. This is
Right.
typical of a river bottom fire. And it's going to be really stubborn. So with something like that, and it's not a huge fire, so we're going to do 100% mop up on that. So that distance to perimeter isn't something that I was using on this one. Actually, this same day, so I handed this fire off to another pilot, and then I responded out to this other fire down the road that same day. This one's more steep terrain. It's not in the river bottom, and had a much bigger potential for becoming a much larger fire. So this is one you can see I put a perimeter here, 200 feet in from the perimeter. And this is after I coordinate with that incident commander. I said, hey, what are you looking for in these mop-up operations, right? So
How did
I
you,
think
yeah,
this is
can you
the,
show how you did that, Sean? How you added that perimeter line? So guys, that faint line, like that yellow line, is actually a 200-foot buffer. That's if you go to your fire perimeter tool, Sean.
yeah. So if we go over to the fire perimeter, we can add a buffer here. So I added this buffer. I just colored it whatever color makes sense to you. And then I also like to drag the opacity down so it doesn't draw too much attention, but it's still visible. So I'll drag that down here. And that's how I get that buffer. I also, when we go through and I click the hotspots, and I get the buffer in here, right? So the yellow stands out more to me. So I typically put my hotspots as yellow. And I know we wanted 100% mop up 200 feet in from the perimeter. So I put that line there. Those hotspots are yellow. And I also we had a pretty significant, there was a draw right here with some larger fuel sources in there, some a little heavier fuels, and so I wanted to make sure that they knew that there was something in there so they can address that if they had to. So I made sure I kept those in, just colored them red, said those are not within that 200-foot area that we're required to get, but keep an eye on that, and if you can, send somebody in there to address those. Again, this one, adjusting. So we talk about adjusting those temperatures. So this is more of this thing isn't loaded with hotspots. So when I flew this one, is more of a search and destroy, right? So we have these cool ones. I remember going out. So what I'll do is I'll drag this up and see where basically the bottom of that bell curve right there, where some of those hotspots just start to disappear. And then I'll look at some of those ones like this one right here is going in and out. So if I'm still on scene when I'm processing that, I'll double check and I'll go fly the drone over that real quick. It'll take a couple minutes and I'll go get super low and verify what kind of temperature that's at. So I'll go over there and fly low and say, look at this hot spot right here. Even when I'm down at like 50 feet above that, it's registering at whatever, at 120 degrees or something like that. So that one's not a real concern to us. So I know that's not a concern, so I can drag that filter up and just put it right above that. I know everything here and all depends on weather and conditions and time of day and all that kind of stuff where I'm going to set that limit for myself at, but it helps being on site and being able to verify actual temperatures, and then I'll come through here and set that filter where that's going to be.
So that's kind of cool, Sean. So you're actually like you'll take that bottom temperature, and then will you what I'd love to know is like how do you deliver this product? Like how do you explain this, right? And so will you use that bottom temperature? So when you go to your IC, or whoever managing this, you say, hey, like these aren't all the hotspots, but these are all the hotspots over based on my check in the field, 120 or 150 degrees Fahrenheit. So it kind of helps them understand.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if I'm doing this on process, and typically I process this on scene. I get a Starlink out there with the laptop and do everything. Right. It's much better to be able to do it in the field and get a product out much quicker. And then with the follow-up flights as well. But yeah, I'll give it to the IC. I'll send them the map, follow up with a phone call, or a text. Changes depends on wherever we're at. But let them know, hey, here's the map. Here's the 200-foot perimeter, right? Everything in yellow is within that 200 foot from the perimeter. You got a little run of hot spots up the middle of the fire, running uphill. And I went ahead and verified everything on this map is going to be over 250 degrees. So they're all verified hotspots at that point. If I can go face to face with him, that's where these panoramas come in handy too, right? I showed you on the other fire, but something like this, because sometimes the ICP is going to be down the road and they don't even see, they know it's a mountainous area, but they don't really see it. So you can kind of come in, look at something like that and be like, yeah, we got some pretty steep terrain that the guys are working on around there. So it gives them a better idea how many resources they're going to need and where they're going to need to position people and where the division breaks are and different stuff like that. So this is where I was right here, flew the fire from right down there, and just you could see like a little, and that they can also see we got a little pocket of unburned fuels here, something to watch out for, something here. These panoramas are really good for their situational awareness. Over here is that draw that was holding more of that heat, right? So all the panoramas are really good, especially if you can do it face to face in person. If I could sit down and show them my laptop, I'll do that. And videos through here work really well as well. But yeah, when I process the maps and I get this out, this is like a typical product that I'll put out, on those days. And then when we do follow up, so the next day, obviously a lot less. This is the next morning operational period, much easier to handle at this point. And then the last day, or this was that afternoon doing the final flight just before they're clearing all units off of there. We only had one remaining hotspot right there in the middle of this kind of rock pile over here, and not a concern for spread at that point. We just flew it. And this one, especially since I only have one, flew the drone over it with the incident commander looking over my shoulder, fly down, look exactly what it is. It was one log in the middle of a bunch of rocks. It was stuck there. It wasn't going anywhere. Not a problem. It was just barely holding any heat. So
sweet, man.
Yeah, it's really effective. Works really well for call it a force multiplier. Able to where we need something 30 to 50 people on a fire before, and now we're able to handle it with about a dozen people in a UAS operator. So, and actually more efficient with the work that we're doing as well.
Thanks, Sean.
So,
I just want to be
yeah.
mindful of time. We got a few minutes left here. I want to leave some time for some questions, but maybe what we can do is if anybody has questions, throw them in the chat now or raise your hand and we'll turn on your mic for you. But Sean, while they kind of ask some questions, can you throw up one of your PDFs and talk a little bit about, what does that actual product that you're handing from a PDF perspective look like? And how long do these take to build? Like, it looks like you've got a perimeter, you got some div breaks, you got some text. Is this a quick process? Like, I think it can be intimidating a little bit out of the gate, but maybe just talk a bit about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so this was that fire. This was the Hell fire. So this is the PDF that I make. They're pretty quick making them. I've worked with some other mapping programs a little bit, and they can get pretty complicated. I love that this is just very easy to make. I don't have a GIS degree or anything like that. Um, just a fireman out here flying drones and making maps, and so uh, these things happen pretty quick. And then I just have basically the default that I try and get the fire name, the time that I did the flight at, and the date, size of the fire, and then we got the legend over here. With the division breaks, I try and make this nice and big so they see where, division alpha, division Mike, all that kind of stuff is. I always like having the inset because sometimes I'll do a focused map if we're going to do more just on like the division alpha side or something like that, so you can see what part of the fire you're looking at as you zoom in. And then I typically add a text box and just type in like this one. I know it's really small for you guys, but it says heat found within 200 feet of the perimeter is yellow, and then all other heat found on the fire is going to be red. There's also a buffer line placed at the 200-foot mark from the perimeter, right? And then I put who flew the fire and who processed the map, put our logo. The QR code is always really nice. So I'll take this product, and while I'm there on the line, I will text it out to the incident commander, operations, the division, the group soups, anybody who's out there working the fire, and then they'll disperse it to their guys at that point, right? So they'll take this map, I'll text it to them, I'll email it to them as well, but the text is the most efficient way to get this thing out there. And then they'll take this, open it up in Avenza Maps, and they'll even use the QR code and share it with all the guys who are working for them. So, I mean, within 5 minutes of me making this map and processing it, it's probably on a fire like this that we, especially for the initial attack version of it, we probably had a couple of strike teams out there. There was maybe around 30, 40 guys out there. Probably 90% of them had this map on their phone within 5 minutes of me processing it at that point. So getting these files, and then they just pull it up on their phone, they open it up, we're using Avenza Maps, and then they walk around, their little blue dot walks around on this map until they get to these yellow dots, and then they look for that fire, that hotspot, and put those fires out and move along. And it just makes it much more quick, much more efficient at addressing these things. So, does that answer that? For larger fires, there's a bit of a different process. We have a whole sit unit, and you're going to have a Google Drive and different stuff like that, and different branches and divisions and stuff like that. But especially for these smaller in-county fires, it's pretty simple getting this information out to everybody very quickly.
Yeah. No, that's great, Sean. I think we were talking yesterday, but another thing just for everybody knows is, if you have a fire, even at 50 acres, right? When you zoom in on Avenza, these dots might be 30 feet wide. One thing you can do is you can just export the map with the ortho, and you can actually export the hotspot as a KML and share that to your ground crews as well. And when they bring that in, a KML is a vector file, so it'll actually scale with them as they zoom in, allowing them to get right on top of it. So that way their blue dot isn't, the entire size of the hotspot. It's actually, pretty dead on. So Sean, we're kind of up at time here. I want to thank you for jumping on, man. If anybody has any questions, I'm sure they can reach out to you directly if you don't mind. Actually, it looks like Rob did jump on. Rob said, Sean, we're prioritizing building in 3D map layers so we can see the context of the map within the browser. Are we right to prioritize that? Is this helpful? That's basically like 3D. Think about Google Earth, everybody, like 3D terrain. Basically, you'd be laying our two-dimensional orthos and hotspots over top of that three-dimensional underlay. So is that something you think would be valuable?
Yeah, definitely. There's value to that. Like you see while I'm doing the panoramas, I'm kind of using that. But it definitely, scrolling around like you would on that Google Earth image or something like that to see the terrain and the features and different stuff like that would be useful, especially with those orthomosaic maps, because you could see where the fuel is, what burned, what didn't burn, where the potential hazards are in the future and for that fire, and develop the plan. So yeah, I definitely see a big benefit to having that as an option.
Awesome. Tim says, thanks for the presentation. Well, thanks, Sean. I'm going to just close us out. I know we're over the hour here. Thanks everybody for jumping in. Some things coming, got a new layers panel, comments, notifications, some user profiles, and then also a new on controller app for our live stream. So stay tuned on some of that. This is going to be being built out over Q4, everybody. So the next one of these is going to be the end of November, which I believe is maybe my next slide. Oh, no, we're into Q&A. We've kind of been doing that throughout. Here we go. The next time we're going to be meeting is November 25th. So we'll have a lot of that to showcase. As always, any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And I just want to thank Sean again and the team at Ventura for hopping in and walking through how they're using the Hotspot tool. I'm going to stay on for a little bit if anybody wants to chat, one-on-one. But for those that need to run, thanks so much for coming, and we'll see you next month. Thanks, Mark. We'll see ya. Thanks, Tyson. We'll see you, buddy.